And welcome once more to the Sandton Convention Centre. And this, of course, is where the inaugural Public Works and Infrastructure Development Summit will take place. Very, very important, as I'd indicated earlier, why this should be centre stage right now, given what we are facing as a country as far as our infrastructure development is concerned, especially at municipal level, which is, of course, the face where the public in general gets to experience service delivery. And of course, we look at what has been allocated over the years, and many questions have to be asked in terms of that expenditure, how much has been spent, how much is left, and then also taking a look at some of the major projects that have been announced over the years, and how are we faring in terms of realizing those projects. Are they completed? Have they stalled? As we saw during the water summit with regard to one of the projects in the Eastern Cape, and how the community had literally brought that particular project to a standstill. So this is something that was mentioned in the President's State of the Nation address, and I went back at least 4 years, and that particular project came up every year, and yet the community has brought it to a standstill at this point. Well, looking at the theme for this inaugural summit, it literally speaks to what needs to happen. And I'm joined now by the Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure, Mr. Dean Macpherson. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Sakina. It's great to be with you this morning.
So, one would say this is long overdue, a summit like this that brings together all the stakeholders. And I had a look at the program of who will be in attendance. You've got the Public Protector, you've got the Auditor General's Office, you've got some premiers in attendance, mayors. And these are, of course, just in a nutshell, some of the people who should be here to make sure that we get moving here.
Yes, well, today really is important because it starts to flesh out the conceptual view that we have for the department of using public assets for public good and turning South Africa into a construction site by using infrastructure-led growth to create jobs. So we've been talking about that, we've been putting our plans together, and here we are today is to say, how do we now implement those plans and get those processes moving? We have bad buildings lying all over the place, not being used, not being redeveloped. We have infrastructure projects that are not completed, over time, over budget, and in some places also just not taking place at all. So I think that that's where the partnerships with the Auditor General come in, the Public Protector, making sure that our premiers and MECs are hands-on, leading the charge to make sure that how and what we want to do in turning South Africa into a construction site isn't just a nice slogan, but is turned into a reality.
And to that point, because we're really good at formulating policy as a nation, we are really good at the platitudes and the sloganeering, but making that into a reality seems to be where we come unstuck. So turning South Africa into a construction site, we've been hearing this for a while now. So why should we believe that it's going to be different this time around?
Well, I think that you have a new determination from government to do so. Secondly, the budget allocations that we fought hard for as the department to be upped in terms of the budget for infrastructure facility have now been realised. So instead of meeting once a year, they meet 4 times a year. That budget's gone up from 3.5 billion rand to 14 billion rand, which effectively means that government's own investment in infrastructure is increasing rapidly because we want to be able to de-risk those projects. So we understand that there's an element of risk, and that we then say to the private sector, we'll partner with you to finance that balance. So I think that there's a new focus to say government can't do this on its own. It doesn't have the funding, doesn't have the expertise, and therefore private sector, you step in, work with us. Let's form a good partnership and let's get some of these projects going. And that's also something that we've been working really hard at, is sitting down with our private sector partners, showing them what it is that we intend to do and bringing them on board so that they are comfortable at a level to say that we can deliver on our promises.
And of course, some of those projects, may be easier to convince the private sector to partner on than others. Because speaking of the risk, we look at municipalities, for example. We look at the underspending in terms of their capex budgets. And what are some of the reasons for that? What are the risks inherent for a private sector company to come and partner there?
The real crisis in infrastructure exists in local government. I'm not convinced that local government has the technical capability or skills to be able to implement complex infrastructure projects at least. And that's why we see so much money being returned to National Treasury. We see the findings of the Auditor General that show that 86% of projects that they viewed were either failures or incomplete. That is a crisis, Sakina, and unless we fix that and we get to the root of that problem, which comes down to leadership in municipalities and officials that can actually do the job, then the problem is going to persist. So we've come with a solution to that. We are piloting a project in 4 municipalities across the country where Infrastructure South Africa will be the lead on those projects, and the money will be used from National Treasury for Infrastructure SA to implement those projects and deliver them. And I'm willing to bet that we'll be able to show that they can be done more effectively on time, and that the private sector has a partner in Infrastructure South Africa that they trust over some local municipalities.
So again, at the municipal level, what have you done to ensure, or what will you do to ensure then that there won't be continued underspending? And as you say, bringing in the private sector partners, some of the risks that we've been dealing with over the past few years has been the so-called construction mafia, where communities in some instances have stepped in and said, you're not going to complete or build something in and around our community without our involvement. So how are you going to mitigate for all of that?
Well, I think on the local government side, that's obviously a problem that is bigger than just public works and infrastructure. It's a cocktail matter. It's a matter for political parties to also contemplate. You know, they can't keep deploying people who can't do the job. And that's a fact and a reality. And I think that we must also start making grants conditional on the performance of officials and political leaders as well. Look, let's be honest, the construction mafia is not community groups. They are highly organized, highly skilled, and weaponized individuals who work as criminal syndicates to stop projects and extract as much money as they can in cash. They inflict terror, murder, violence on these construction sites. And in fact, it's communities that are the biggest losers in that. That's why we called the National Construction Summit last year in November, and we put a plan together of how to deal with the construction mafia. Just a few days ago, on Friday, we announced that 240 people have been arrested so far in relation to these crimes, and we are stepping up that because at the end of the day, it's those communities that are desperate for services that are being affected by the acts of these gangsters and thugs. And so we must do everything that we can to put a stop to them. We are also institutionalizing a social facilitation framework. So we have a common approach to dealing with communities, making sure that they are included, making sure that they own these infrastructure projects and that they protect them as well.
And again, going back to turning South Africa into a construction site. So what are some of the priority projects that you will be focusing on?
Some of the priority projects have to focus on water. We have a water crisis in the country. We're obviously continuing to focus on partnering in the energy sector, and we're looking forward to being involved in the National Transmission Network rollout, which is 14,500 kilometers. It's the single largest infrastructure project of 350 billion rand, and that will be almost entirely funded by the private sector. We're also looking at other issues related to bridges, roads, railway, port expansions, all of those economic infrastructure projects that can really get the country going. That's what we have to focus. We have a low growth problem, and we are not growing fast enough. We're not creating jobs fast enough. And so that's where all of our attention and focus must be. We're also putting our own money behind that by creating a project preparation fund where we are effectively paying to do preparation projects on infrastructure. So we will do all the technical work. We will bring it to a bankable and feasible stage so that instead of having a 10% success rate on infrastructure, we'll have a 90% success rate on these projects.
So we take projects, for example, like the Lesotho Highlands Water Project. You take the Umzimbubu Dam Project. Those projects, they've featured in Sona after Sona after Sona, and they've been running for years now. What is the status? for example, on those two projects, and how much has been spent already and how much is left? Are we going to have cost overruns in those projects? Because this seems to be the nub of the matter, where these projects just go on forever, and, you know, we as the public, we don't seem to know exactly how things are progressing.
I think part of the problem, Sakina, is that infrastructure is disjointed across the country. So you have line departments that implement their own infrastructure projects, and we are a coordinating function of infrastructure, but we're not an implementer, and that's part of the problem. And we really want to get to that point where, you know, if you want to have a common approach to infrastructure, you have to have it coming through one place. So, you know, you can't have multiple departments doing multiple infrastructure projects, because, again, you know, is the capacity, is the technical ability there to do so? And I think that that's why you see cost overruns. That's why you see projects that should be taking 5 years take 10 years. But where Infrastructure South Africa comes in to lend its assistance, we've seen those projects speed up and be done on time. And we are advocating really for a more central approach to infrastructure and not this disjointed, disorganized approach that government currently takes.
To that point, though, the public wants justice. They want those who are responsible for those cost overruns. They want those who are responsible for spending unnecessary money on these projects to be held accountable. However that accountability ultimately looks, but there has to be accountability for when things are not done according to the book and where people deliberately have these costs overrun.
Absolutely, and that's why through the Construction Industry Development Board, I've been very clear to them that I want to see companies blacklisted that overcharge the state or deliberately take too long. I found out that only one company since 2002 has been blacklisted. That's not good enough. So we have now 40 currently going through the process, and that I'm fairly confident will be blacklisted shortly. We have to make sure that if you rip off the state, that there is a consequence for that. You cannot then just go to another department or to a municipality or to a province and get work as well. So we are being very strict on that, and we want to say, and in fact, I think 2 weeks ago I was in the Northern Cape at a magistrates court that we're building on behalf of the Department of Justice. And I sat down with the contractor and I was very clear. I said, if you take longer than the 26 months or more than the 89 million rand, you will pay for that, not us. We will not pay a penny more, and we will not wait a day longer. So, you know, you better get on with the job if you want to keep getting work from the department. And that's the kind of tough approach that we have to have. We can't say that, you know, a budget is a target for someone to get to. They should be doing everything that they can to build it under budget. And then we should be able to reward those companies if they're able to do those contracts on time and on budget. Instead, what we do is we keep giving tenders to people who can't complete projects on time or who overcharge. And that is just a status quo that we can't allow anymore.
So as we wrap this up, one of the concerns for some in society is, of course, the privatization of many of these state-owned entities that may need private sector investment. So let's talk about that and how that's likely to pan out, given that we've seen a lag, so to speak, of private sector investment in broader infrastructure projects in South Africa.
Well, I think the lag exists because there's no clear parameters for the private sector to be involved in. And, you know, the state can't sort of maintain 100% ownership of something and say, but we want your investment. That's not how the real world works. It's not how business works. And so we have to be realistic that if government doesn't have the funds to turn these SOEs around and to turn infrastructure projects into reality, the private sector must step up, but then the private sector must step up as a partner, not as a, you know, sort of a spectator. And I think that that's the different approach that we have to take. And that's why I think that the talk of concessions in some of our SOEs is really good and important, and we must make those commercially viable. But, you know, clearly the status quo is not working. Government isn't able to maintain and run all of these SOEs. And privatization shouldn't be a swear word. It's it's more of a partnership. That's how I see things. And I think that that's what the space that we want to get into.
So more hear from us here in Sandton, and of course the Minister giving us an overview of what is envisaged. And of course the proof of the pudding, as they say, is in the eating, and we will have time to see how all of this develops. And more here from the inaugural Infrastructure and Public Works Summit here at the Sandton Convention Centre. We'll be speaking to other stakeholders as well. 500 people are more or less expected, and they are starting to come in now. So we'll tell you more about some of the projects, and of course just that stat again that the Minister mentioned, only one company since 2002 that's been blacklisted. And we know everything that's gone on in this country that's gone wrong as far as infrastructure development is concerned. That is staggering. But we'll come back to you a short while later, but for now it's back to studio.